300 million. He is a celebrity regularly featured in popular media, who is greatly renowned and respected for his breakthroughs and innovations as a top manager and entrepreneur in the music industry. He has launched numerous artists into chart-topping, award-winning careers. He is best known for managing the award-winning singing group Destiny's Child, along with the solo careers of its members, including his daughter Beyoncé, the multi-talented, iconic superstar who has won more Grammys than any artist in history, and her sister Solange, who is a multi-talented singer, songwriter, actress, and music producer. Dr. Knowles is the recipient of many awards, some of them ranging from a MTV Video Music Award, the 2011 Living Legends Foundation Award, the Century Award of Excellence, 1911 to 2011, from the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, to be honored also by the city of Houston with the declaration of a Mathew Knowles Day. He is an active and long-time voting member of the National Academy of Recording Artists, Arts and Sciences, and serves on its Grammy Board Committee. In 2011, he was appointed to the Board of Directors of the Gospel Music Association, and we're very pleased to be able to host Dr. Knowles on our campus to dialogue about his two books, The DNA of Achievers, which came out in 2015, and Racism from the Eyes of a Child, published last year. Joining Dr. Knowles this afternoon is Marla Frederick, Professor of African and African American Studies and of the Study of Religion at Harvard University. A graduate of Spelman College with a BA in English, Professor Frederick earned her PhD in Cultural Anthropology at Duke University, where she completed research on issues at the intersection of religion, race, class, and gender. She continued her work as a postdoctoral fellow at Princeton University's Center for the Study of Religion and at the Interdenominational Theological Center's Office of Black Women in Church and Society. Professor Frederick is the author of 4 books and several articles. Her first ethnography, Between Sundays, Black Women and Everyday Struggles of Faith, University of California Press, 2003, is an ethnographic study of Baptist women's social and political engagement in Eastern North Carolina. In 2007, she co-authored a book entitled Local Democracy Under Siege, Activism, Public Interests, and Private Politics, which won the Best Book Award for the Society for the Anthropology of North America. Her most recent book, Colored Television, American Religion Gone Global, Stanford University Press, 2016, explores the rise in African American and female televangelists and their influence outside of the United States. My colleague, Rashay Richardson, is an associate professor of African American literature here at Africana. Her other areas of research and teaching interests include American literature, gender studies, and Southern studies. Her essays have been published in journals such as American Literature, Mississippi Quarterly, Forum for Modern Language Studies, Black Renaissance, Renaissance Noir, Transatlantica, The Southern Quarterly, Black Canberra, Inca, Phyllis, Technoculture, and Labris. Her first book, Black Masculinity and the U.S. South, From Uncle Tom to Gangster, came out at the University of Georgia Press in 2007 and was highlighted by Choice Books among the outstanding academic titles of 2008. Currently, she serves as the co-editor of the New Southern Studies book series at the University of Georgia Press. Professor Richardson is also a visual artist whose mixed media applique art quilts are the subject of a chapter in Patricia Turner's Crafted Lives, Stories and Studies of African American Quilters, 2009, and of a short film by Anne Cremieux and Geraldine Chouard entitled A Portrait of the Artist, 2008. Her quilts also featured in Lauren Cross's film, The Skin Quilt Project, in 2010. Professor Richardson's current book project, which focuses on Black femininity, is called Emancipation's Daughter, Reimagining Black Femininity and the National Body Beyond Aunt Jemima. In fact, had it not been for this research and the teaching that it generated, I'm referring to Beyoncé Nation last fall, the course that she offered, we all probably would not be attending this event today. I would like to turn over now to questions that will be posed by Dr. Richardson and Dr. Frederick. And we will be doing that. We will be looking at some clusters of questions, and then also I hope that you've written some of your questions or will write some of your questions along the way, because we'll be able to pick them up and then I can look through them and just sort of bring them together so that we can ask questions toward the end of this public conversation. Okay? So, our first cluster of questions focus on the book that Dr. Knowles published last year, Racism from the Eyes of a Child. I'd like to preface these questions by citing Dr. Knowles in the introduction when he writes, quote, "I could never mend the country's racial chaos in a book, but I am sure I can fix a chaotic part of myself by writing it." End quote. I'll turn to Marla, Professor.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be here at Cornell. I want to thank Dr. Shay Richardson, Dr. Gerard Aiken for organizing the event. And it's just a privilege to be here and talk with Dr. Knowles about these two really incredible books. And so my first question comes kind of as an anthropologist. Racism from the Eyes of a Child is a book that takes us through it. Dr. Knowles explores his family history through this text. And what's really powerful in the book, he makes one profound insight at the very beginning. And he says, racism uses at its primary base an eraser to rub out histories and facts. It says racism uses at its primary base an eraser to rub out histories and facts. And so one of the things I deeply appreciate about the book is your willingness to explore your family history. To interview multiple family members, to record the good, the bad, the troubling, and to connect your history to your present. I think you do this incredibly well. And so I'm curious about what made you decide that this research was important, that this was a project that was important now. And I imagine that you could have hired any number of historians or genealogists to do the work for you, but you went into the community in Alabama and interviewed your family members. How did you decide to do that? And what was the most challenging part? How did you decide, what questions did you ask? What was that process like for you?
Well, it's a 10-part question.
It is a 10-part question.
But I first want to just say thank you, and thank you, Dr. Richardson. This has been an incredible, I'm going to come back to it. It's been an incredible day for me. I've met some incredible people, and you guys are special. So what you see tonight is unrehearsed, is what I do, and I just give you me, how I do me. So the question is the chaotic part of me that I wanted to really, it was therapeutic in a way. I talk about in my book the 10 years of therapy from racial trauma that I had to go through. But I think it's important I give you a little context. How many of you know have ever been to Gaston, Alabama? Raise your hand. So I'm the only person in this room that knows about Gaston, Alabama. Well, I tell you a little bit. It's 25,000 people. I was born in 1952, so do the math to tell you how old I am. My mother went to high school with Coretta King, Andrew Young's wife as well, from Marion, Alabama. And I never went, this is going to be probably amazing to you, I never went to a black school, although I'm 66, until my junior year of college. So you're looking at someone that integrated a lot of formats. A lot of challenges came along with it. And that's that chaotic part that I had to find and understand about myself. And that's what this book did. A lot about my family I didn't know. I didn't know that my grandmother, Hester Hogue, had twin brothers, Sidney and Gidney. I don't know why they named them Sidney and Gidney. But that explains the DNA of Beyonce having twins. And so a lot of things about this book, I didn't even know my great-grandfather's name on my father's side. Didn't even know his name. Knew nothing about him. So it was that initiated me wanting to research. And when you talk about racism erases, it wants to erase our past, think about, and we won't get on politics, but think about our current president, how he tries to erase everything Obama has done, President Obama has done. That's an example. And it's here, it's alive and well. And I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to have a social courage. That's the word I'd like for you to take away tonight, is social courage. The responsibility that all of us have to speak up, speak out, sooner, quicker, faster, about xenophobia, homophobia, racism. We should have the social courage to do that. And so that was some of the reasons. You know, I feel like Beyonce. When Beyonce performs, she starts out slow, and then there's a certain part of her that I know she's ready. I'm ready. So thank you for the question. I'm in the music industry.
I'm really thankful and truly excited that we have come to this monumental event today after so many months and weeks of planning, and a lot has gone into it. So I'm just deeply thankful for everyone who has helped with the planning and made it possible. To my colleague Gerard Asher here, who was just so instrumental in helping to bring all of this together, as well as Victor Younger and our current director, Kevin Gaines, as well as our interim director, Femi Taiwo. So there's been a remarkable community of people who have brought all of this together. And we're really privileged to be here. Thank you so much, Dr. Knowles, for your support of my teaching and encouragement. I really appreciate it, and it's been deeply inspiring. My first question for you addresses the ambivalences that people often feel about the U.S. South. Is simultaneously a site of terror in the minds of a lot of people of African descent, and at the same time a symbolic home place, so that D.C. is figuring as a home repeated in film and various texts and popular culture in a romanticized and nostalgic way, even in a lot of instances, and yet its ubiquity as a site of trauma because of histories of slavery and Jim Crow looms large. So there's a complex image of the South in most people's minds. I'm fascinated by the emergence of the quilt as an image in your memoir, borrowed from one of your relatives, Dr. Oscar Underwood Jr. And as a quilt artist myself, I find the metaphor fascinating. But in general, there are a couple of images that ground this compelling memoir, Racism from the Eyes of a Child, including the eye on the one hand and the quilt on the other. And I actually ended up on my first book cover in 2007 wasn't actually my choice. It was the graphics department at my press. And I'll never forget, you know, just looking up on the computer, because I had a fantasy of what my book cover image should be that spanned back to my interest in Spike Lee's films. And there's a certain scene from school days that I was imagining from the time I was a graduate student as the one that should go on my book. And so I remember I was talking to my grandmother about something and all of a sudden twirled around in the chair and there it was looking right back at me. And I really didn't have a lot of choice. But over time I've really come to appreciate the image, and so that's something that like makes me feel even kinship at a visual level with racism from the eyes of a child. I'm just wondering about why the quilt and the eye are there as images for it.
Good question. That's it. So when I was thinking about what would I title the book, what would the image look like, I opened the book with this story, true story. When I was 5 years old, my mother would take my brother and I. My brother was 9 years older than me. We would go to what we call the country, Marion, Alabama. And so my mother and my grandmother were like oil and water. They just didn't get along. Hester Hogue. At this particular night, my mother made a bad choice. She decided around 10 o'clock at night, after an argument with my grandmother, that she was going to take my brother Jesse and I, and we were going to go to the nearest relative, which was about a mile up the road. So first, we had a dirt road we had to walk down, and here's the main highway. So I want you to visualize 10 o'clock at night, and it's kind of like the journey last night from Syracuse to Ithaca, where there's no lights, it's dark. Then you're in a taxi and you're kind of scared. But here we are walking up the highway, and it's nothing but the light of the moon and the stars. And in the distance, we could hear these sounds and we could see the lights. But as they got closer and closer, as a 5-year-old kid, I could tell my mother's body language changed, that something might be wrong. And so she said, suddenly, we have to get in the bushes. We have to get in the bushes now. And so here I am, a 5-year-old kid, and I'm not understanding what's going on. Then my mother literally gets on top of me and starts praying. And she tells my brother Jesse, if anything happens to you and to me, or you and your brother, are to go up under this barbed wire fence, and there's cattle on the other side of the fence. And I just want you to run. So the lights got closer and closer and brighter, and the horns got louder until suddenly they passed. And I'm crying. My mother's telling me, shh, be quiet, be quiet. And I still, as a 5-year-old, you don't understand this. And so once the cars passed and we got out of the woods, the bushes, there was a bunch of flags on the highway. And like a kid, I'm curious, and I pick up the flags, and she spanks my hand because they were Confederate flags. And what we had just witnessed was a KKK rally. So can you imagine, had they saw us, what the outcome would have been at 10 o'clock at night in Marion, Alabama? And so that's where the eyes of a child, because I'm telling this story from my eyes that started for me at 5 years old. And then Dr. Underwood, who is my second cousin, he tells a story about a quilt, the beauty of a quilt. And then yet its ugliness that's really up to your eyes to see and deliver. So that's how I came up with it.
Thank you so much. And following up this question, I have another one that's very rooted in my disciplinary perspective as a scholar in African American literary studies. I'm excited by how much your memoir resonates with the voices of several figures in African American literary and cultural history, especially as I began the reading, it was resonant with the voice of Richard Wright to the extent that he, in his fiction, recurrently mentioned the ways in which the Black body was routinely terrorized on the Southern landscape. And then also there's this profuse use of images, like metaphors that you infuse throughout the manuscript that I think make it just noteworthy and very compelling from a prose standpoint. And another author who comes to mind is W.E.B. Du Bois, a major father in African American intellectual history. And Racism from the Eyes of a Child reminds me of Du Bois. It's inherently Du Boisian, I think, even on a number of levels, including in the sense that it invokes veiling and this kind of double consciousness that was at the heart of Du Bois's intellectual project that was rooted in part in psychology, but in other ways as well. Du Bois presents his story as one that tells the story of the broader African American collective, as some critics have noted, and you do something very similar in your memoir, where on the one hand it's a kind of individual story that you offer, but it invokes a collective African American voice, and to that extent it's very multivocal in how it comes together. And then there's another dimension that I think is very important to acknowledge, where it's about how one can experience traumas in childhood that last a lifetime, traumas that have a lasting and lifelong impact. So your work, I feel, needs to be read in African American literary classrooms and other kinds of classrooms throughout the country, because it's compelling in that way as literary work, I think, on its own terms. But I'm wondering in general about how you relate to African American literature. Who are the writers that you read? Who are the writers you think we should be reading at this point? The writers that we should think with and know?
Well, I like Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers. That's my favorite book.
Cover to cover.
Love that book. But you know, first of all, thank you for the accolades. And images can be very, very powerful. And I share some of those stories of trauma. For example, when I was growing up as a kid, I think I went to the dentist. And I'll share this with you. I need to be at the dentist because I literally have gone to therapy to go to a dentist, because at 12 years old, I went to the dentist for the first time. And there was a colored section and a white section. And so if you're in a colored section of a dentist or a doctor, you didn't get treated on until the white patients got treated. And so imagine if it's 3 o'clock your appointment and it was 6 o'clock before the dentist got to you, white dentist. He was in a hurry to get home to dinner. And you guys are too young to remember there were colored sections, there were colored bathrooms, there was colored water fountains. So here I am, first time at the dentist to get an extraction. And my mother, of course, wanted to go into the room with me to the exam room. And the dentist nurse was adamant that she could not come in the room. My mother was fairly adamant, and when you read the book, Helen, my mother's name Helen, she was no joke. She stood up and stood her ground. So she said no. So the short of the story is, the nurse said, you have two choices. You can either leave, or you can let me take your son into the chair, the dentist example. I sat there what seemed to be an hour with all of these needles and all of those loud noises that were back then extremely loud, by myself, at my first anxiety attack. So I have this fear at 66 years old about going to a dentist. That's how trauma works. That's why I can identify when a woman says that she was traumatized 25 years ago. I can identify with that. It doesn't go away. So I, again, wanted to share. This is about folks having a dialogue. You know, I was saying today, change is supposed to be uncomfortable. Change is not supposed to be comfortable. I want people to feel uncomfortable. And I want folks to dialogue about racism and talk about colorism, which I talk about in the book as well. So that was the purpose. I've learned as I'm writing my own style, I like to have others tell their story. So I have my sister, my first cousin, on my mother's side, on my father's side, and one of my classmates in junior high school that shared what it was like going to an all-white school, 1,000 white students, and there was 6 of us, what that was like. Folks, I'm here to tell you there's some people that's paid some really prices for all of us to sit here today, including their lives, so that we can all be here today. So I feel as though it's a privilege for me as well to be sitting here tonight.
So, Dr. Knowles, you mentioned, you gave us a segue when you mentioned the word colorism.
Well, you and I had already talked about it.
Yeah, and so in fact that was another set of questions we had about your memoir. And it had to do with colorism and the ways in which you poignantly demonstrate how the prejudices of colorism can be inherited and passed on. I know that Professor Frederick also had a question about that, and it's also connected with this video.
So how many of you all have seen Saturday Night Live skit, Beyonce Turns Black? Okay, so for those who haven't seen it, we queued it up for you to see it. And then I'll ask my question.
appeal anyway.
This gets us so much, and it highlights, for me, in many ways, several of the points that Dr. Knowles brings forward in racism from the eyes of a child, as well as the DNA of success, particularly around developing crossover appeal and the issues you raise around colorism, right? What's striking is they say she turned black, right? As if she wasn't black before.
Maybe they didn't know her dad's black.
Right. But it seems like in formation, she's kind of unapologetically black, if you will. And she's feminist, definitely, in many of the songs on Destiny's Child's album. But I'm curious, from your perspective, what does it look like for Beyonce to have such wide appeal, to cross over, if you will? What is that process to develop an artist that crosses over? Is that a lyrical style? Is that an aesthetic? And then what do you think of this new formation and response to that, and the work that Solange does as well, who also is, in this kind of more unapologetically black aesthetic moment as far as the music and
So I will say that in the marketing of Destiny's Child, we consciously wanted to have broad, mass, international appeal. And I teach this, the intro to the recording industry. And one of the first days of class, I just challenged my students, do you know the average population demographics in America? How many white folks are there? How many black folks are there? How many Hispanics? How many Asians? So approximately 16 million Asians, approximately 35, 38, 40 million blacks, 60 million Hispanics, 230 million whites. So if I was selling this, by the way, I'm not getting a check from this. Not getting a check from this. They're not one of the sponsors, are they? But if you can make a choice, do I want to sell this to one demographics, or do I want to sell it to mass appeal? We, from day one, wanted to sell to mass appeal internationally. So some of the things that we did was just from a marketing perspective of how to get mass appeal. So that's the first thing. Beyonce has evolved, as I was sharing.
So can I ask you what that looks like to have crossover appeal? What kind of decisions do you make aesthetically or with lyrics, or how does that work?
So Columbia Records is who Destiny's Child is on, and Beyonce still are. So I can depend on the $3 million marketing budget that Sony will give for an album, or I can go to L'Oreal and say, we'd like to do a commercial, put the song in the commercial. Beyonce gets a check. We get another check for putting the song in there. But we get, instead in front of 10 million people, 40 million people. That's one of the ways of building a partnership with Walmart or Nintendo or Mercedes. We've done over 27 major endorsement deals.
Right, so you're saying that it's not necessarily the lyrics or the sound of the music that changes, it's the placement of the music and art. And I'm asking this because Lerone Martin is a religion scholar, his book, Preachers on Wax, and he talks about African-American preachers entering into the market to sell their tapes early on when tapes first started, but that for them to be signed with some of the larger labels, they had to not talk about politics and race. Like those kinds of things had to not emerge in their sermons. And so then, for artists today, or for the time that you were doing crossover appeal, was there decisions around lyrics or the sound of the music to make it have more crossover appeal?
Well, it was always about female empowerment, independent women builds those bills. Your favorite song, Irreplaceable. Couldn't think of that. All of those were female empowerment. And that's what it was about. And that was a conscious decision for female empowerment. So that did play a role in it. But as Beyonce has gotten older, again, I shared, when you're 15 years old and starting out, no record executive is going to let a 15-year-old making multi-million-dollar decision. That's just not going to happen. So most people forget she was 15. As she's gotten older, in her mid-20s, now in her 30s, she's taken more control over her career. But initially, she didn't have that business control whatsoever. That actually came from my team, coming up with the marketability of the brand and building a brand. You know, when I got into the industry, people were selling records, not building a brand. And there's a major difference in building a brand. I hope I answered.
You did. It sounds like the brand that you were building was a brand around female empowerment.
Correct.
With Destiny's Child, which includes women across cultures.
And by the way, the choir, you are awesome. I saw at least 3 Destiny Child groups.
Thank you. We were speaking about the question of colorism in the context of success, and there are also other ways for us to be speaking about success. And I think also important for the students in the audience is thinking about the relationship between success and their education. So we had a couple of questions along those lines as well. So, Professor Richardson?
Well, I just am really fascinated and definitely feel kinship with you, not only because both of us are from the state of Alabama, but also because both of us attended Catholic school. In my case, I attended from 1st through 12th grades. For elementary school, I attended St. John the Baptist Catholic School in Montgomery, and then went on to St. Jude Educational Institute, which is best historically known as the final camping place for Selma to Montgomery marchers in 1965. At St. John, the Order of Sisters was the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, and at St. Jude, the Dominican Sisters. So Catholic education has been foundational in my intellectual formation. I'm ever intrigued by the extent to which Catholic education can also energize philosophical thinking and even revolutionary thinking, ironically enough. I know that you were an altar boy in your Catholic school experience, and yet still there have been limitations in some instances in the Catholic educational model. You know, sometimes it's been known to be authoritarian and restricted. I think a lot of those strategies and tactics had lifted by the time that I began my education. But, and it's also heavily ritualized in a lot of ways. But I'm really curious about what the impact of Catholic education has been in your life. I haven't seen it in your writing or kind of think about it in the sense that there's a certain level of literacy and that Catholic teaching can routinely build in students because of the diligent training that one gets in writing and speaking, gaining those kinds of skills that I think are useful for one's toolbox. And I think that it's also been an educational context that's been uniquely impactful and effective in producing a Black professional class. And so I am concerned a lot now about the extent to which this infrastructure is being eroded. Like Catholic schools are closing all over the place. This has been going on for years. And I wonder what that means, you know, and the shift of emphasis from urban context to suburban, as a site for outreach to students and to an increasingly predominantly white population. So all those questions are also important, not to mention the issues that we've seen with priests and issues of abuse. But I'm just wondering about the impact of Catholic education on your formation in terms of race and masculinity.
Okay. So I went to St. Martin de Porres Elementary School in Gaston, Alabama, and it was mixed, but predominantly 60-40, mainly Catholics. My mother wanted to be a Catholic so really badly, but she had divorced. So back then, if you had divorce, you couldn't do that. I agree with you in terms of literacy. All the fundamentals that I learned, reading skills, writing skills, math skills, were very, very positive. But I will say that one of the negative takeaways, if I had to work on in therapy, was the guilt and the shame that is foundational, or in my experience was foundational at Catholic schools, that we were taught through the guilt and shame. It was always the guilt and shame, which is not. Not a popular response, but what you see is what you get.
Well, this actually picks up on Dr. Richardson's questions. She's talking about the closing of Catholic schools, but another type of school that was instrumental in your life was a historically black college, Fisk University.
Mm-hmm.
You entered there your junior year. By dint of racism, I mean, that's a fascinating story. You ended up at Fisk. You all have to read the book.
Yeah, you have to read the book to get that story.
Despite the circumstances that brought you to Fisk, your journey would not have been complete without that experience at Fisk University. And you speak very passionately about HBCUs kind of throughout your book. They show up, whether it's Fisk or Alabama State. Your wife is a Spelman alum. So I'm curious what that experience meant to you, attending Fisk University, and your sense of the value of HBCUs today for this generation of young students coming up, and how we preserve the legacies there.
Yeah.
And also, tell them, share with them the connection between you and Oprah in Tennessee. Ha ha ha! We'll let you hear that.
Well, Oprah and I lived in the same apartment complex, and I used to go to her father's barber shop there in Nashville. But I went to Litchfield. I shared that.
Because he was at Fisk, and she was at Tennessee State.
She was at Tennessee State, another HBCU. But I have a chapter that's called Fisk Out of Waters, because I never really been to an all-black school. So my experience the first day at Fisk was like, what the hell? I had never seen anything like that. People changing clothes 2 or 3 times, loud music, people loud. I was at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. We had 15,000 students there. We had 40 black students, 15,000 total students. So I had just never been in that environment. And fortunately for me, what saved me was my fraternity, because I'm a member of Omega Psi Phi, and that was my instant connection with brotherhood, is because I had someone that I could really call upon. But when we talk about, a whole bunch of things, because, when you look at Fisk, and we talk about colorism, Fisk was an example. When I went to Fisk, I played basketball. I would have never been able to go to Fisk. I was too dark. We used to do the paper bag test, the brown paper bag test. And if you were darker than the paper bag, which a lot of folks in this room would not have ever been allowed to go to Fisk University. So that's where that colorism, and we have to talk about the complexion of our different complexions and hues of our skin. Colorism was imposed on us in slavery. It wasn't an option. It was imposed upon by the slave master. And that's why we have these various shades of black. Let's be honest about it. So that was an experience for me, because I had not been exposed to that.
And so how do you give back to HBCUs now? Would you talk a bit about the work that you've been doing at HBCUs?
Well, you know, I taught at Fisk for, 2007 to 2009. I lived in New York and Houston, and I would fly to Nashville on a Sunday, teach a class on a Monday, and then go back to New York for free. I did it for free. Provost, don't get any ideas.
We'll sign you up.
But, you know, I did 8 years at Texas Southern University, both the School of Communications, which I think I'm speaking to some of the communication students tomorrow, as well as the School of Business. I've spoken. Next week I'll be at Alabama A&M talking about mental illness on HBCU campuses. So I certainly have given back, and that's my way of giving back. I thoroughly enjoy being a professor. It's educational for me as well. And this is, as I sail into the sunset, academia is what I want to do. So, and write books, and lay on the beach, on and on and on. I was going to get some questions from the
Yes,
audience.
from the audience, and they're coming up here. Yes. I'll look through them while we turn a little bit to your other book, actually, The DNA of Achievers,
Sure.
to speak about the complexities of becoming successful. And in the book, which came out in 2015, some of the traits you mentioned include, for the successful professional, passion, vision, work ethic, team building, learning from failure, thinking outside the box, and the one that is a challenge for us all, which is risk-taking. I'm thinking also of our students in the audience. Risk-taking for you started early. You were among the first African-American students to attend desegregated schools in Alabama and at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. Later, you developed ways to assess the pros and cons of risk-taking professionally. So, is there a cautionary tale about achieving success that you might want to share with us today?
Well, I was just thinking, one of the traits is being a visionary. And when you're a visionary, you often are taking risk because it's uncomfortable and it's never been done before. And so you have to explore ways to be successful at it. But to me, the most important traits are two. First is passion. Because often we don't get to live our passion. We get to live a parent's passion. We get to live a spouse passion. We get to live a society passion. But we don't get to live our passion. One of the things that I just require of my students, and I ask them, are you passionate about what you're doing? Or are you doing it for somebody else? Because I assure you, if you're doing it, and this is never popular, what I'm about to say, but if you're doing it for someone else, it'll last 3 or 4 years and you'll fail. Because when you live your passion, you never work a day in your life. I don't work anymore. I get to do what I want to do and have fun with it. Because I get to truly live my passion. And what coexists with passion? Work ethics. You find someone with incredible work ethics, and you find someone that's passionate. And sometimes parents say, well, how do I know if my kid is passionate? If you ever have to tell them to go to practice. No, they're not passionate. I've never had to tell Beyonce or Solange it's time to go to practice. They was telling me, hey, Dad, you don't want to miss practice. But it's truly about living your passion and identifying early what your passion is, because what I've found is successful people, highly successful, people, because the title is 10 Traits of Highly Successful People, the DNA of Achievers, 10 Traits of Highly Successful People. Start very, very early identifying their passion. And for you, it's now. You have to really spend some time on asking yourself the tough question, what truly is my passion? Thirdly, learning from mistakes. You're looking at someone that's made mistakes, who's failed. But failure and mistakes are opportunities to grow, not a reason to quit. Most people quit rather than grow from them. I've never become successful because I was successful. I've become successful because I made mistakes and I had to learn from them and not do those again. And then building this team. It's not I, it's we. Anybody that's successful has an incredible team, like the team I've seen today. That's what's required. Beyonce has an incredible team that's been with her on an average of 15 years. From her personal assistant to her security, her road manager, publicists, they've all been with her for years. Just like my assistant, Lena Manza, has been with me for 15 years. So it's about building that team. Another important one, I won't go through all of them, but thinking outside of the box. You know, most people are box-in thinkers. And what do I mean by that? Is that we've been conditioned to hear these words in our ear. You know, because you're black, you won't be able to do this. You know, because you're gay, you won't be able to do this. You know, because you're poor, you won't be able to do this. We're conditioned and box-in thinkers. And typically, I literally have a box. I ask two people to get in the box and ask you to move around. There's nothing but walls when you're a box-in thinker. I can't do this because of this. I can't do this because of this. I'm a victim. I can't do this. And guess who else is in your box? People like you. That's all you want in your box is people that think just like you. You're a hater, you don't have a hater in your box. Right? So those are the things that the DNA of Achievers is talking about.
And in fact, the book looks specifically at professional success. And so there are a number of questions that have come from the audience that are asking for a slightly different definition of success. That is to say, outside or maybe including the professional, what do you define as success?
Me, success is happiness. When you're 66 years old and you're blessed to see and grateful to see your kids successful, for me it's just joy and happiness. Just like I tell someone, money does not define success. Money gives you options. Money gives you options. It doesn't guarantee you success. Some people get that all wrong. But trust me, I'd much rather have options. And so would you, I think.
There was also a very straightforward question. What advice can you give to a communication major?
Well, we live in an incredible age of technology. Technology will change every way that we live. And that's the beauty about what's going to happen in the field and area of communications, is technology will make a significant impact. You know, when I first got into business, streaming, no one knew what streaming was. You know? Can you imagine? There was a time that I grew up, we didn't have a cell phone. There was a time that I would pick up the phone and it'd be another party. It was called a 2-3 party line. So literally at your house, I could hear your phone conversations. There was a time where I had to pull up my car to a pay phone so that I could make a sales call. Technology will change and keep evolving and evolving. That's the wonderful thing that you guys have that we didn't have. So I think it's a wonderful, great time to be in the field of communications, especially media, as this will really change in the next years. I always say you will no longer hear music, you will see music. In other words, every time you experience music, you literally see a video with it, because it brings it to life when you see music. Remember I said that tonight. Hearing music, audio is a thing of past. I mean, seeing music.
Another couple of questions are asking about Beyonce's success. That is to say, and it's an interesting question, like, what is it like to raise a feminist icon?
It's real good. Actually, Solange is also good.
Yes.
And I think they grew up in a household where their parents were entrepreneurs. My former wife, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but Beyonce is my former wife's maiden name. Her name literally is Beyonce. But to grow up in that household, I was the #1 sales rep at Xerox, fortunately worldwide, 3 out of 4 years. My mother had a highly successful hair salon. But to grow up in that environment, I think really had a significant impact on Beyonce. And watch her grow as a mother. The other day I had the twins and Blue Ivy. I don't know how she does it. I mean, one was on her lap, the other one was trying to walk and knock his head up against the thing. Blue Ivy's like, oh, watch me dance. I'm like, how do you do this? You know? And then go and perform every night to 80,000 people. That's truly impressive, to go from 0 to every night performing to 80,000 people every night.
Professor Richardson, Frederick, would you have any comment, question on the feminist icon and this response?
Well, I mean, I'm fascinated myself by Beyonce's history and her formation. I don't mean that as a pun. I mean literally formation over the years as a feminist, and then more broadly by the questions that have come up in the early research on Beyonce related to the question of her feminism, forums that have been staged on that question, and the course of the question, is she or is she not? And it's always very interesting, and of course her embrace of the term feminist, I would say, is extremely revolutionary, because the tendency in the mainstream or even in the popular arena is for many women to disidentify with or to disavow feminism. Beyonce takes a very different approach by embracing it and, citing major feminist authors such as Chimamanda, Adichie. And I think that all of that speaks to her seriousness about and commitment to feminism as a philosophy and practice. And of course, the political climate that you mentioned earlier makes it all the more crucial that people really know where they stand on these issues. But I think that in some cases, a superficial reading of Beyonce's vastly multifaceted repertoire makes some people just dismiss, offhand this idea of her as being a feminist. But if one is a serious researcher about Beyonce, then one has to be fair-minded and give credit where credit is due.
Well, first of all, I applaud you for your class. You did a job well done.
Thank you.
Secondly, you know what I'm most proud of when I think about Beyonce and Solange, but when I'm talking about Beyonce, is one, she's very humble, extremely humble. You'll find the most successful people are the nicest, most humble people. They don't have a sense of arrogance, ego. They don't have that. Let me tell you what ego is. I want you to remember this. Ego is the anesthesia that deadens the pain of stupidity. Ego is the anesthesia that deadens the pain of stupidity. That's what ego is. And she doesn't have it. And that is what makes me the most proud, is to say that I'm the father of a young woman that just does it right, that lives her passion, that helps people and gives. You have no idea how much she gives of her time, of her money, and helping others. It's truly amazing.
I had one question that squeaked in finally, and it has to do with the choice of college that the student has, so looking at your memoir and recalling, for example, that you in the beginning had not attended an HBCU, right? And then you subsequently did that. This student had the choice of going to Howard or Spelman and chose Cornell, and sort of has questions about, is that the right choice for her?
Well, it's absolutely the right choice, because I hope I'm teaching here one day. If you don't ask, the answer is hell no. No, I truly just think that you have to do the research. There's a whole lot of decision making that goes into on the parent and the student, how they make that decision.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone very much, and especially our guest of honor, Dr. Knowles. Please join me in...
I have one final word.
Oh yes, please.
And I always say this everywhere, opportunity that I have. I like to just tell you the story. I travel a whole lot. I'm in Los Angeles, going down the escalator, and there's a nun from Mexico, and she has a jar, and it's misspelled, please give to the missionary. And I've learned to give to it hurts, and everybody's level of giving is different. To you it might be $1, to someone else $10, but I don't judge. And so I gave, and the nun gave me a card, and this is what I would like to always leave you with. I have a habit. I have 6, 7 cards in my pocket. I'll tomorrow put these cards in whatever I'm wearing tomorrow. And the next day, they'll go into the jeans I'm wearing. And I finally read what was on the back of the card, and that's what I want to leave you with. It said, pray not for a life free from trouble. Pray for triumph over trouble. For what you and I call, I just had a mental delay. For what you and I call something, God calls opportunity. What's the word?
Struggle.
Struggles. What could be another word?
Strength.
I'm sorry?
Strength.
Strength?
Strife.
Strife. I still didn't hear you right. Strife. But the thing is and what I want to share is that life is not going to always be perfect. Just like it wasn't perfect for me just then. It's not going to always be perfect, but that's okay. Find opportunity inside of that. But what you and I call adversity, that was the word. God calls opportunity. We're going to have adversity in our life. Embrace it. Learn from it. Don't panic. I could have just panicked, right? Got the word. Could have not shared, who would have known if I knew the word or not, right? But I've learned one thing. If I don't tell my story, he's going to tell his story. I prefer to tell my story than his story. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite you to a reception outside now, where you can mix and ask more questions if you'd like. Please, you're welcome.